What's up, everybody? Welcome to Conversations with me, your host, Jason Glaze. This is our first client interview. As most of you know, New Name Ministries, we are a counseling ministry, and Brian Haas has agreed to come on and share his experience with counseling, what God has done in his life through counseling, and how it's benefited him in all areas of his life. The main thing we talk about is how he learned to kind of let go of control of his relationship with God. That part of the conversation is so beautiful and fascinating. You're really going to enjoy this one. If you're watching on YouTube, hey, make sure you subscribe, like, drop a comment. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, thank you so much. You are going to enjoy this one. Thanks for being here. Brian Haas.
Hey, what's up, Jason?
How are you?
Good, man.
Thank you for doing this.
Dude, thanks for asking me, man. It'd be super fun.
Yeah, so this is technically our first client interview.
I'm the first?
You're the first.
Somebody's got to go first, I guess.
Somebody's got to go first. So, like obviously, New Name Ministries, we're a counseling ministry, and some people say, hey, you don't do a lot of podcasts on counseling type stuff.
Here you go.
Here we go. So I've been wanting to, pick a few clients to actually who are willing to tell their story and all that.
Yeah.
And you were more than willing, which I love.
Happy to, man.
Yeah. So before we get into that, just kind of people who don't know you, just give us the vitals, family, job situation. Who are you?
Yeah. So married, it'll be 16 years this June. So coming up on 16 years. So married to her, Becky, and she's a teacher, kindergarten teacher. 3 kids. They all have C's. So you have Connor, Cole, and Collins.
There we go.
And didn't intend to do all the C's, but it ended up that way. At least by we got to the last one, we didn't want her having some complex of not being good enough to have a C like the rest of the siblings there. So we've been here. It'll be 10 years this summer. Grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. Went to school in Kentucky. Lived in California, and now here. And lead a church, local church, Dawson. Like I said, been here 10 years. We launched it, planted it, started it, and man, the joy of being able to pastor it. So
from Ohio, how did you become a Clemson fan? I've always been confused by that.
Yeah, it's very confusing. So the short version is we let our kids pick because we moved, again, from California to here.
Yep.
And apparently that's the very first question people ask you when you are from out of town and you move to Dawsonville, Georgia. People are like, oh, who's your football team? And I'm like, we need a football team. And so literally I asked the kids, I was like, who do you guys want to cheer for? And some really good friends of ours, Clemson fans, my oldest said, the Tigers. We said, well, which Tigers? There's several of them. And they said, the one in Miss Savannah's basement. They have this huge Clemson Tiger in their basement. And we're like, we're all in. And so Clemson fans. So we have no ties to Clemson whatsoever than my kids picked.
The kids picked it.
The kids picked.
So you threw California in there.
Yeah.
So you went Ohio, California to here?
That's right. Yep.
Nice.
So worked at a church out in California for about 7 years. Intended to stay 1 year, and God had other plans. So we stayed about 7, and then got the opportunity to come here and launch a church.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Super fun.
Nice. And you've been pastoring local Dawson for how long?
10 years.
10 years.
That's right.
Wow.
It will be 10 years. We launched September of 2014, so we are coming up on 10 years.
Yeah, I remember when y'all started, you were in the movie theater.
Movie theaters, 3.5 years of Portable Church, man.
Wow.
Yep, it was awesome.
Golly.
Wouldn't change it for anything.
Yeah.
But I'm also glad that we're out of that season.
For sure.
But very thankful.
Yeah, you growing. I know y'all just expanded.
Yep, did a remodel. Yep, so an old 84 lumber building. We took over about a third of it at first, and then we just finished the remodel last summer.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice. All right, so let's jump in.
Yeah.
One thing that's unique about you, as far as counseling goes, is why you came in.
Yeah.
You are the unicorn. Really, I would have to think really, really hard to think of another person who came in for the reason you did. 99.99% of the people, they come in with like a presenting problem.
Right.
Like we got a lot of pain, depression, anxiety.
Healing from something.
Whatever it is. But you came in for a different reason. So kind of just talk about what led you to say, you know what, I think I want to start counseling?
Yeah. Great question. So first of all, it was cool just how we met, first of all. It had nothing to do with counseling. And then out of that, I'm like, oh, he's a counselor. I think I need one. Like literally that was my thought process. At that time, just seeing, hey, our family's going through a new season with my kids getting older, knowing the direction that it seemed like God was leading our church. That was going to be a very new season, very different stage and season. Regardless of what your vocation is, whether it's within a church context or not, you kind of can get into those rhythms of, all right, I kind of know what to expect. I kind of know what I'm doing. Even in the unknowns, you're still like, I've handled something similar to this. I got to a point where I was like, I've not done anything close to this before. Like every single day felt like uncharted territory. And I just started to look at the people in my life, the wonderful people in my life, from my family, my wife, my close friends, peers within our church leadership, and also mentors within our church leadership. And I started to feel like I'm missing a piece of that. I want to be self-aware, but how self-aware are we really? Like, I can tell myself I'm self-aware all day long. It doesn't mean I actually am. So I'd like to think I am, but am I? And then there's also, we've even talked about this. For me, there still is a level of fear of, well, what if, right? Nobody goes into a family or a ministry or a job like, man, I am intentionally going to jump into this and then wreck it all. Those things happen, but it wasn't because of an intent, right? You fell into that, you slid into that. There's just decisions that stacked up over time. And man, that terrified me. I'm like, I'm not intending to get to that place, but I also know I could. How would I? How could I? And it took me almost into a negative kind of a spiral. So then it was like, I've got to just ask some questions. I need somebody else to ask me questions because I didn't want to get to that place. So some of it came out of just, I know I'm somewhat self-aware, but I don't think I'm self-aware enough. And now that we continued to meet, I'm like, I still don't feel like I'm self-aware enough. But then there was also that fear side that said, you just never know. We are capable of horrible things. And I want to do everything that I could on my side. And that even sounds like that control thing that I'm sure we'll talk about.
We'll talk about it in a minute.
Yeah. All of the things that I could take care of. Can I do something? And I don't even know if preventative is the right word, proactive, continued self-awareness, like something within that. I just felt like I was missing a piece of that.
Yeah.
When I think of, again, we're supposed to have a lot of people around us, and even on the physical side, it's like I go to a doctor to make sure that my blood levels are right and all the counts are right. I go to an eye doctor once a year, so it's like I've got all these other people that are involved in some way in my life. Most of those, I would say, are some version of proactive and preventative. And I'm like, man, I can't lead my family. I can't lead a church. I can't be the man of God that God has called me to be just based on what Brian thinks.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. And so wise too. Like, we get our oil changed, right? What about the soul, right?
Right, yeah.
And so, yeah, so wise and I think the two words are great. You were proactive and preventative. And I think that's amazing. It's very wise.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of talk about like what you experienced. How has counseling benefited you?
Yep. So first of all, the questions that I get asked, specifically from you, with the people that are involved in my life, and when I say involved in my life, not from multiple layers removed, like close people that truly, truly know me, have permission to speak into my life, they're still coming at it from a different perspective. Counseling, and in our counseling relationship, you are a trained professional. You know what to look for. You know what to ask. And some of those questions that you might ask might be something that somebody else has asked me, but then you'll have a follow-up question that's like, oh, I've not been asked that before. Or you'll dig into, well, let's talk about the intentionality. Where's that coming from? So there's these layers of questions that I'm getting through counseling that I'm really not getting anywhere else that cause, so much deeper conversation, deeper self-awareness, and it's kind of even those blind spots of like, I didn't realize that's where that was coming from. Yeah. So for me, those questions is a big piece of it. It's also, practice what you preach. I say all the time, counseling is a sign of strength, not weakness. To have people speaking into your life, to have other people that have perspectives and a unique perspective, a trained perspective. So just having some perspectives, there's been some things, we've talked a lot about identity. There's some pieces of my identity that I would not have said were a problem before starting counseling.
And you're talking about problems with your identity, trying to seek it in places other than God?
Yes. Yeah. Where it's, there's a part of me that is very much a people pleaser. I want to be liked and I want to be accepted in these different things. And some of that is just, there's maybe a healthy side of that of like, sure, I want to be likable, I want to be able to relate with people, but our conversations at least help identify, well, what does unhealth look like in that? And those are conversations that I can honestly say I hadn't really had before.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really takes that objective voice to keep us balanced.
Absolutely.
And that's what that's all about, is balance.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned control earlier.
Yeah.
Well, one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. It's not a fruit of Brian.
Absolutely not.
It's not a fruit of Jason.
Right.
But it is a fruit of the Spirit. So self-control is not bad within itself.
Yeah.
As long as the power source we're drawing it from is the correct one.
You're
right?
exactly right.
So now we're just talking about balance.
That's exactly
right.
right.
And it takes that objective voice to ask the right questions to make sure that we are balanced.
Yep. And I'll tell you, with you even mentioning balance, there's also something that's been so helpful in the context of, and again, whether it's ministry or whatever your vocation is, there's now a different place for me to process and even give some healthy labels to some things and emotions and feelings that then I can take home versus just my personality is this extrovert and I'll just say whatever comes to the front of my mind, not saying that's helpful necessarily, but here's my wife and I'm trying to be super transparent and everything else, but I haven't processed it yet. I don't have the right words to go with it yet. I don't have the right labels with it yet. So me 5 years ago would have just, hey, Becky, and then just dumped things. Here's what I'm working through. Here's what I'm dealing with. Here's what I'm thinking through. Now I have a way of processing and adding some healthy language around it. So I'm not just dumping on her or other people. And even that has created such health in how Becky and I process things and how we talk through things. And for me to be able to verbalize, here's what God's doing in my life. It's given some great language for us, that even as a married couple, that's translated so well from a counseling session to then how can I talk about this with her, being fully transparent, but also in a healthy way.
Yeah, that's something I don't even think about often, is how counseling benefits us to have better conversations with others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yep.
I haven't thought about that maybe ever. It must have been a long time if I have. One thing that I feel like God kind of snuck up on you with, and I had no idea this was going to be part of your journey. And because this is one thing I have every client do. So we live in a world now where we're just stimulated so much, with visual stimulations, what we hear, especially with phones.
Yep.
I mean, we're just constantly stimulated, and that has a strong effect on the brain. And so one thing I have every single client do is, hey, 3 minutes of silence a day.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we start day one with 3 minutes of silence a day. And this is not really about you talking to God or God talking to you. However, if God wants to talk, we're not going to be like, hey, shh, I'm in my 3 minutes. No, we're not going to do that. But this is the only purpose of this is just learn how to get the brain still, right? So that's something I have every single one of my clients do. And that kind of launched you into a direction.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So, the first time, I'm over here laughing as you're talking about that, because I remember sitting in your office and you explained what we're going to do. And if I remember it right, at least what was in my head. So what do I do? What am I supposed to, do I need to write something down? Am I supposed to be thinking about something? And then you said, no, you're just gonna be still. Well, what do I do if something does come in my head? What do I do? I mean, you're like, Brian, just stop. We're going to be quiet for 3 minutes. Okay. I mean, I don't think I had done that. I mean, again, blame it on a personality or whatever else, just upbringing, any of those. And that whole silent solitude, stillness, mentally, I know that is a discipline. But man, it was not even a thought of mine. In fact, would try to do everything I could to not have the silence and solitude, and because I would rationalize, well, but I'm filled up by people and I want to be able to pour out. And so that 3 minutes, man, that timer couldn't have come soon enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it was hard and awkward but then to your point, that opened up kind of this door that was, I am so uncomfortable with it. Oh, but I want more of it.
That's so interesting.
It was. And I mean, I've even used there's this language with you of, there's this mystery piece of it where I still don't know what to do with it, because I keep going back to, what am I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. What am I supposed to be hearing? Mm-hmm. What if I don't hear something? I mean, it just opened up all these other questions that I had never really personally wrestled with, thought through, and processed before.
Yeah. And this is just for the person listening. You and I have talked about this. There's no way to stop thoughts.
No.
And so it's impossible.
Yep.
But the goal is to let the thought wash over you and return back to silence.
Yep.
And it's okay to focus on breath, a sound machine, or whatever. Yep. So there can be a focus. Thought comes, let it wash over you and keep returning.
Yep.
And it's amazing how hard it is, because at first you say, okay, 3 minutes, that's easy. It's not easy.
It's not easy.
Yeah, because we're so not used to it.
Yeah.
Even the verbiage we use as Christians, we have our quiet time with God.
But it's not a quiet.
It's really not.
Yeah, yeah.
And by the way, this stuff is so good and so beneficial. But reading, right, journaling, all that's great, but that's still not silence.
Right.
And so the silence kind of snuck up on you.
Totally.
And even though it was uncomfortable, you caught yourself craving more.
Yeah. And that opened up, like I said, some other questions I not wrestled with. And that's where you would challenge me. And again, going back to why counseling, nobody else I hadn't been able to have these kinds of levels of conversations with other people, because those weren't the environments for it. So counseling created this environment where there was true stillness, true quiet, true solitude, right? Mm-hmm. And then that gave me this, well, what about? Mm-hmm. And that's where even some of these, you mentioned the quiet time, my quiet time, which again, nothing wrong with that. I still do that, but this is very different. That's still me dictating everything. It's me stepping into the presence of God, saying, all right, God, here's what I want us to talk through. Mm-hmm. God, here's what I want to hear. God, here's what I want to read. God, and even though there's most certainly questions and I'm wanting that, it's me starting that. And the 3 minutes, I even use this. I have a group of guys that I pray with once a month, and that's literally all we do. We start with give God the first. Give God the first words.
Wow.
Right? He's going to get the first word. So we sit in 3 minutes, and then, okay, God, we do have things we want to ask you. We do have things that we want to intercede with. There are things that we want to specifically be praying through, but can we give him the first words?
I've seen what you're talking about right now help so many people get unstuck. Because I believe in the beginning of our relationship with God, he totally lets us lead.
And I think we need to.
I do too.
Yeah.
We need to.
Absolutely.
Hey, God, I want to read my Bible in a year.
Do that.
I want to journal every day, right?
Yeah.
I want to do this. I want to do that. And then all of a sudden, at some point in our journey, he wants to start leading.
Yep.
I think it's so good what you said about what you do with your group. We're going to give him the first word.
Yeah.
So now he's dictating how the time goes and not us.
That's right.
Yeah. Was that a difficult transition?
I don't know if difficult's the right word. It's complete unknown, right? It's like, I don't know what to do with it. Maybe maybe not so much unknown, just it's still so new.
Yeah.
Like still, I think the last time we were talking, and you mentioned kind of helps you get unstuck. I don't have any ruts are not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes those ruts can keep you going in the right direction. Sure. So ruts can have I get it, positive and a negative there. But some of my rhythms, my spiritual rhythms and practices and disciplines, still do those. Absolutely. It's not you throw them all out. Still do those. But I was asking you, I was like, well, what else? Like, what else? And you're like, is there something else? And I'm like, ooh, let's talk about the difference between those two. And so for me, it's still figuring some of these things out. So I don't know if I'd say it was a difficult transition. I needed to be okay not in the driver's seat of it.
Yeah.
I needed to be okay. And like I said, I had to get over some of the fears of, well, what if I don't hear something? What if I don't sense something? What if right? And now all of a sudden I'm only looking at the results piece of this.
Right.
Well, what if we do this 3 minutes and we're finished and we're like, well, okay, let's go on with our plans. And I need to be okay saying, that's fine.
That's fine.
That's totally okay.
Yeah. That's so good. That was our last conversation that we had, is you're like, okay, I'm experiencing this new thing with God.
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah.
And then the Holy Spirit kind of took us in the direction of maybe nothing's next right now.
Yep.
Maybe we stay where we are.
Maybe we sit in this.
Maybe we sit in this.
But that's my default, right?
Let's talk about your personality, because a lot of people watching this or listening to this, they're going to have your personality. And this is a great personality given to you by God.
Yep.
Let's talk about how your personality kind of, I don't want to say hinders, but could be a stumbling block to this stillness that we're talking about.
Oh, no, I think hinders is the absolute right word to that. I mean, so personality, I don't know which, if you want the temperaments or the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagrams, whatever they are.
Just describe you.
Yeah. As an extrovert that loves being around people, truly filled up by being around people. It's that driven. It's what I think Enneagram would call it, the achiever or something along those
3.
lines. Yep, it's a 3 wing of 2. So
you're 3 wing 2.
So it's just go, 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 right? And there's most certainly it's not personalized right or wrong, but they all have their health and unhealth. And you've been super helpful, and here's where that starts to get unhealthy and everything. But the reason that became truly a hindrance is because prior to, I would say, all right, God, here's how I relate best to you on my terms. So I love to be in a Bible discussion. So let's read and then let's talk it out together. I love to have my prayer time, but I love doing that while walking because I need to be moving. And God, that's how I relate to you most. So I wouldn't have said this years ago, but now it almost felt like, hey, God, here's who I am. So I need you to bend completely to me because this is how I really want to talk with you. And when you say it like that, I mean, that sounds so arrogant and so disrespectful. And this coming from a guy that says, no, I'm surrendering my life to him and I want what you want. Your will be done. Here I am, send me. Oh, but if you're going to talk, you have to talk this way. Like that's how, as I reflect back, that's how it feels to say it out loud. And I remember early on, we went through Sacred Pathways. I can't remember the author, but crazy helpful because the author did a great job of here's some of these practices, spiritual disciplines, whatever you want to call them, and then recognizing our personalities, God-given, as you mentioned. Yeah, we're going to have our bends. I would prefer to relate with God, spend time with God, talk with God like this, which is fine. But what if God says, oh, but Brian, I want to talk to you this way right now.
Right.
What if I want to spend time with you like this? And man, that's where you even start to experience some of that brokenness and a brokenness in a sense of, oh, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk to you in that way. I don't want to have to sit quiet for that long. Like, can't we go do this instead? But then as a husband and as a dad, man, I start to put that in a different frame or a different lens of, no, Becky and I spend all kinds of time together in different ways. And sometimes, you know what we need is the still and is the silence.
Yep.
And I think of that with my kids. Some of the best moments I have with my kids is just snuggling in their beds at night.
Sure.
And I'm like, I love throwing the ball and we love doing this, but oh man, it would break my heart if my kid said, no, Dad, I don't want to talk to you this way. Oh, that would break my heart. And so then there was even this like conviction of, I've just been giving God my terms. God, I'm going to talk with you, but I want to talk to you like this.
Yeah.
And it felt like he was starting to say, oh, but I want to talk to you a little differently.
Yeah. I want to lead this dance.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Yeah. When I first met you, I would say that relatively you were living a surrendered life, but there's always another level to surrender.
There's always something else to surrender.
For me, for you, for the person that's been journeying with Jesus for 60 years, there's always a next level of surrender. Always.
Yeah. And I think that's where going back to your comment of it helps us get unstuck a little bit. Some of that getting unstuck is, well, what is holiness not touched in my life? Where else do I need to surrender? What is the next step in trusting Jesus more? What is he doing that I need to bend to him? What's he doing? Where's he moving? Where's he leading? And instead of me saying, hey, come and follow me, it's truly, no, I'm going to follow you, even if it leads me to a place where my personality doesn't want to go.
God, that's such a great picture too, because Jesus often said, hey, come follow me.
Yep.
If somebody would have walked up to Jesus and said, hey, Jesus, you come follow me, that's weird.
Yeah.
But that's really what we're doing a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
Hey, Jesus, you come follow me.
Yeah. And even if you were to go through old journals versus journals like more recently, again, God, I'm gonna walk into my quiet time. I've got a list of things that I want to be able to pray through, ask for, talk through. Now it's more of a blank page. And when you mention letting those thoughts wash over, sure, I need to get them out of my head, right?
Yep.
Again, that's that personality, self-awareness of if it stays in there, it's going to distract and it's going to steal focus. So, hey, that's a thought. We'll deal with whether that was from God or from me later on.
Yeah.
But it's just a different approach. Yeah. You start from a very different place.
And I tell people the 3 minutes of silence is an on-ramp.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
It opens something up for
later. It just opens
Mm-hmm.
something else up. Like I'm not trying to turn us into Buddhists
No.
who are trying to, get rid of thought.
Yep.
That's not what we're doing. It's just getting still enough and letting that stillness be an on-ramp. Because if I can help someone hear the voice of God 5% better than they currently do, win.
Yes.
Right? If
Yes.
somebody can help me to hear the voice of God just 5% better than I do now, When.
Yes.
And that's all the 3 minutes of silence is.
Yep. And that voice that we hear from God, or whatever language you want to use, spirit-led, spirit-filled, voice of God, he's speaking truth. And in those moments of silence, stillness, quiet, that quiet voice of truth.
Yeah.
I mean, how often are we? I mean, this is, again, another reason for counseling. We buy into so many lies. Many of them we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
Well, I've just assumed this and I believe this over time. And over time, if we continue to believe in those lies, well, then we start acting based on those lies.
For sure.
So now our behavior's tied into all this and our relationships. And to be able to quiet all the voices, to be able to quiet all the thoughts. God, I just want to hear your truth. And then be able to go from there and reflect on that. And is that within Scripture, and be able to have people to talk it out. Again, counseling's a great place for that. Man, it starts to break down those long believed lies.
Oh man, that's so good. So good. So let me ask this question, because this is one thing that's been really cool to watch in you, is presence. Has just that word alone, presence, has almost been a theme for you in the last few months. Or probably even longer than a few months. Talk about that. Like, what is this journey done for you as far as just being able to enjoy presence over what?
Well, just as you were, because you're talking like the presence of God, being in his presence, that stillness and solitude and quiet. So again, whether you want to blame it on personality or whatever else, there's a desire in me to have high productivity, right? And productivity, I'm not in a look at all that's been accomplished, just doing things. Not even, you would look and say, that doesn't seem very productive. Well, but I was at least doing something, right? Need to be doing something. And I had equated, if I'm not doing something, then I'm not productive. And if I'm not productive then, and then we can go down that road. So by not doing something, it almost felt like, well, I'm not being very productive. And well, if I don't come in with my list of things with God, well, then this is just a waste of time. Why are we even doing it? And that wasn't an unhealthy space of, well, my time with God just has to be productive. Well, productive based on, once again, whose terms? How are we defining productive?
Great question.
And so being able to get out of that as best as I could, and still growing in that, to be out of that, my time with God is intended to be productive by Brian's definition, and just being in his presence. Once again, I'm like, I don't think I've thought through it in those terms before. But again, as a husband and as a father, that makes total sense, right? When Becky and I go on dates, when I spend time with my kids, it is always productive. No, but I love spending time with them. So it gave me some language around my spiritual life and my time with God that I didn't have a category for that. It was, I spend time with God because these are the things we're praying for, and these are the things we want to get done, and these are the things I need answers for, and these are the people that I'm interceding for, and all those are fine and good. But it's almost like the Spirit was getting me to a place of, but where's us? Where's just us? And I'm like,
just us.
And I'll say the word scary. The scary thing is, like, it was hard to answer that. Well, I don't know. When is it just me and God? Because again, I pushed so hard against the stillness and the quiet. I just needed to be productive. I needed to be doing. And it was very difficult for me to get to a place that I was, and you said the word joy. Joy now, it didn't start there because it felt wasteful.
Oh man.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
and that was my struggle of, how do I, in my mind and in my heart, not look at not just the 3 minutes, but trying to expand that as this is wasted time. And again, it sounds, we would never verbalize that. That's why we need counseling. I need a safe place to say that, because it sounds so terrible say.
But it's so beneficial to hear ourselves say it.
Yes. And then why am I saying that? Why am I feeling that way? How do I move through that? And to do that in a healthy way, to now I can say, that presence time where it's uninterrupted and it's not planned and it's not me dictating. It is so not wasted time.
It's not.
But he had to teach me that.
Yeah.
Right? And that's part of being a disciple. We have to learn those things.
Yeah.
We're not born again and all of us, or at least in my story, it's not born again and then, oh man, I am just so enlightened and I get it all. It's, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to do that. And for me, I don't know how to, I did not in my relationship with God know how to sit still with him and let him lead.
Yeah. Talk about this. It's going to take me a second to set this question up. So, you and I both believe that we have two worlds that coexist right now. We have a temporal world, which has this table and this mic in it. And then, but there's another world going on in this room right now, which is a spiritual world. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the productivity is basically measured in that temporal world. Measuring things in the spiritual world is a little different, right? And God took the story of Moses and really began to show you like what just being in the presence can do.
Yes.
To talk about that.
Oh yeah. Exodus 34, if I remember right. So Moses goes up on the mountain and comes back glowing. Just glowing. And sure, there's some things that God wanted to say to Moses and everything else, but at the end of the day, just being in the presence of God, he came back glowing. Mm-hmm. And it still wrecks me. I'm like, that's what I want.
Yeah.
I mean, forget all the how we would quantify something and all the productivity. That's where the Spirit, I really feel like, started to keep. We always want him to mold and shape us. I think that was an area that he's still molding in me of like, Brian, I just want you to be with me and then glow. And I'm like, I don't know what that means and looks like, but yes, like that desire, sometimes our behaviors come before the desires, and that was part of that. But now there's that desire there. And even in what Jesus talked about in John 15, it's that abide language. Abide in me, right? If you don't abide, then what? Then there's no productivity. Even uses the word produce there.
Yeah, fruit.
But that comes from what? Abiding,
remaining
in. And I mean, goodness, as a pastor and a preacher, I mean, who knows how many times I have not just read, taught, preached, that whole thing. But oh my goodness, you talk about that coming alive in such a more personal way in this last 2 years, this season. Because then I started asking, you mentioned the two worlds. Well, what does that look like? Right. And for some, we'll take a very, I don't want to say extreme approach, sell everything, go live in a monastery, and there you go. Right. No. That's how you abide. And then you literally get rid of everything else and then just are in the presence of God in the way that we would think of it, maybe a little bit more tangibly. So I started asking, well, how do I still be a husband and a father, a pastor, a friend? How do I stay involved in my community? How am I still in those places, yet still abide only in him? And I would say I don't know. There's been a lot of authors and a lot of people that have been asking kind of that same questions that have helped put some good language and kind of framework around it. But I think the point is we don't fully figure it out, but we're constantly wrestling with it. And I've kind of, at least in my head, and as we've talked, the fact that I'm thinking about it to me says, oh, it's at least an awareness of it. Right? If I'm going to abide in him, oh my goodness, can I make sure that he's all I'm thinking about? And I can write emails while still abiding. And I can parent while abiding. And I can be a husband while abiding. I can have a conversation and a podcast and still abide. I can be in his presence and do something else. The problem is when I start to do all these other things and then I start to forget.
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah. And so to me, if we take the Jesus language, we abide, which means the veil is thin and we're centered into, that presence of him.
Yeah.
We're going to produce fruit.
Yes.
That comes out in the temporal.
Absolutely.
And also too, like I think it's Paul that talked about the sweet aroma of Christ, right? And then you talked about the glow.
Yep.
So the more we spend time in his presence, the more we're going to glow.
Yes.
The sweet aroma of Christ comes out.
That fruit's going to be produced.
And I mean, that's what people are drawn to.
Yep.
It's like, I think it was Peter and John who the guy said, hey, we perceive you've been with Jesus.
Yeah. We can tell.
Yeah. We can tell.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so attractive, and I think that's where the real fruit is produced.
Yep.
So like I spent the first 4 years in ministry trying to burn myself out for Jesus because I thought that was very noble.
Right.
Yeah.
Work hard, be productive, stay busy,
100%,
do all the things. Yep.
And then get mad at you if you're not.
Sure.
Then I learned that this way of life, I get more meaningful things done by prioritizing presence than I ever did prioritizing productivity.
Yeah.
More meaningful things, like more impact, more just those conversations of like, I want what you got, right? The things that are happening in the spiritual world, we're just more in tune with it.
Yeah. And I also think too, going even back to why I even sought out counseling is you don't know what you don't know. And in our worlds, we will say, man, I want to be Spirit-led. I want to be led by the Spirit. I want to do His will. I want to stay aligned with His will. Well, how do we know that we are without abiding and without being in His presence? So it for me, very practically within my family, how I lead my family, but also how I lead our church, it made sure it wasn't Brian leading those things. And I think that's where, going back to some of those fears of, one of my prayers has been like, I always want to have this healthy fear of fame, because I'm like, I don't see that ending well for me, right? Because that would be me leading it.
Yeah.
So if I don't abide, well, then you take that out of the equation, and it's just me doing what I would want to do. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, may that never be true for me personally and my family and our church or in our community.
Yeah.
But without the stillness, without the quiet, was missing a huge, I don't know if the word is a huge piece of it, or a level of abiding. And it changed perspective. It changed heart. It changed pace. Changed a lot in just that posture and that approach.
Yeah. I want to ask a question that may throw you off.
Bring it on.
Yeah. It may catch you off guard a
All
little
right.
bit. So, you and I both from time to time go to, so the church I attend, North Georgia Church,
Yep.
open the doors every Thursday,
Uh-huh.
right? And basically there's just, the room is dim. There's some music playing, and it's just a time to come in and pray.
Yep.
The church building is open to come in and pray. And sometimes you and I are there at the same time.
Yep.
And the last time we were in there together, like, you were sitting kind of in front of me to the left, and I noticed that you took your shoes off.
Oh, yeah.
Is that something you do every time?
Every time.
Talk about it.
Yep. So it did throw me off a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead, dude.
Nope.
Cry it up in here.
This is why I love counseling. So real quick, let me maybe set up just a little bit. So in that space of, as we started down that road, as you were very helpful in me recognizing the need of, hey, regardless what your personality is, regardless of the rhythms you already have, like the silence piece of being in the presence of God is not just needed. It's one of the ways that we abide. And in where I'm at spiritually, that had to become a priority for me. Knowing my personality, and through our conversations and that self-awareness of, that's gonna be the first thing to get knocked off the schedule, right? It's gonna be the first, oh man, I have another meeting show up. Oh, that's gotta go. Like, there's no possible way, if it was just reliant on me remembering or me making time for it, there's no way that would have lasted at all, unless I'm sitting in your office and you've got a timer with me. So I was like, if I'm gonna prioritize His presence, if I'm gonna prioritize and lean into the stillness and the quiet and the solitude, man, I've got to do something practically to do that. And I can't remember if Lee was the one that shared it. I can't remember how I heard about it, but it also coincided with, I was leading our church through a study of the Gospel of Mark. And one of those parts within the Gospel of Mark, it caught me of, and Jesus went into the hills by Himself to pray. And that specific one was out of Mark 6. I remember preaching that one. So then I started diving in a little bit more. And there's, in the Gospel of Mark, there's plenty if you look through the other Gospels, but specifically in the Gospel of Mark, there are only 3 times that phrase is used, that Mark specifically says, and Jesus went by Himself, usually into the hills, that one specific in chapter 6, but went by Himself to pray, and it was to an isolated place or into the hills. One was in chapter 1, the very beginning of His ministry. Chapter 6, and if you look prior to that, you see the death of John the Baptist, you see the feeding of the 5,000, you see all these things happening. So right smack in the middle of all the things, goes into the hills by Himself to pray, and then you see it in chapter 14 with Gethsemane, right before His arrest and then crucifixion. And so I'm doing this study in the Gospel of Mark, highlighting Jesus went by Himself to pray, and I love that we don't know what He prayed.
Yeah.
Again, so originally I would have said, well, what did He pray? What was He asking for? We get a little bit more commentary in chapter 14, but still, He was just with God. So I see the silence, I see the solitude, I see the presence, I see the intentionality behind that. So I'm like, I need hills. And it's so great that North Georgia Church opens up their doors every Thursday, and I'm like, that's my hills. Those are my North Georgia hills. And so it's on my schedule. Unless our family is out of town, that's where I just have to have it scheduled. And so all that to answer your question. So when I go into the hills, so to speak, to pray, I just have to changed my posture. So specifically that comes out of the Moses story, right? Burning bush, Moses, he says, here I am, and stop, don't come any closer. You're on holy ground. So for me, it's, yes, I always know that, God is here and I'm in the presence of God, but that is, I think it's helpful when we change a physical posture.
For sure.
Because that just impacts things, right? Things feel different. And again, even the location, it's not the church that I'm part of or I attend or lead. It looks different. It smells different. It feels different. I mean, everything about it is different.
It would be so hard for you to do that in your church.
Yeah, because it's so familiar, and I start thinking about other things,
Yep.
and I'm like, no, it has to be different for me. And just a little, knowing somewhat of my personality, it has to be different. So the shoes off is just, I'm on holy ground.
Yeah.
I'm in his presence, and it's just part of that physical. Some people will kneel, some people will stand. I mean, that's just,
Sure.
I'm on holy ground.
Yeah.
And then
so
I'm just
good.
quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started thinking about Luke 10 when Jesus sends the 72 out.
Yep.
And then they report back.
Yep.
And they were just, it says they were overwhelmed with joy
Yep.
of what they had seen.
Yep.
Hey, we have seen the dead raised, the blind restored, the sight gets restored. They just, and Jesus' response was so good. He said, hey, I've seen it all. And like, he's acknowledging, like, I know what you're talking about. He said, but don't rejoice in this. Rejoice that your names are written in heaven. I mean, that was a moment that doesn't get talked about enough with him and his followers.
Yeah.
He wasn't minimizing all the good works they had done.
No.
But he was saying there's something even deeper.
Yeah, he's
And
prioritizing.
He's prioritizing sonship and identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's really what I've seen God do in you is prioritizing the things.
Yeah.
And I think you could say it's not that you've been less productive.
No,
Not at all.
No.
But it's just you're working now and functioning now from a different source.
Yeah. And one of those other reasons going into counseling for me was also what I mentioned of like the fears of how I could mess this up, and within my family and within a church and a community. I mean, and we can do so much harm with good intentions. and so sure, there's been productive. It's not like I'm lazy by any stretch.
No, there's no fear of that with you.
No, not at all. Right. We got to watch the workaholic side of things with me, but and I hesitate to even go back, but it's, well, what would have happened if I operated with a productivity mindset that grew into an unhealthy mindset? Where would that have led me to today?
Yeah.
2, 3, 4 years ago, without having a posture and a priority of his presence, I don't know. And that's, for me, that's scary to think about.
While we don't know the details, big picture, you would have encountered burnout, and then you got to cope.
Yep. And we all have a way to cope.
Yep. So it would have been burnout and cope with burnout.
Yeah.
And who knows what that would have looked like.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful. And I don't say this, I hope it doesn't, push back as my counselor if it does. But I truly don't worry about burnout.
Yeah.
Because of the people in my life, because of the consistency that I have with a counselor that knows what to look for and asks the right questions and leans in. And it's, accountability is a piece of it, but it's really, as you hear me talk, then you're leaning in. Hey, let's talk more about that. That doesn't sound like the right mindset. Where's that coming from? Is that the right question? And then I have something to truly wrestle with, and because it's going to be easy. Again, it happened just in our last conversation. I started to try to get back in that driver's seat. Like, wait. How do I continue to let him lead? And I focus on being in his presence, and let that be where, going back to John 15, let that be where the fruit comes out of, instead of me just trying to make it happen. Yeah. So that, and I do, I empathize and sympathize anytime, especially within the church world, I hear those words burnout.
Oh yeah.
Because I see how it can happen, and I'm just thrilled. I'm not saying I'm burnout proof by any stretch, but when you open yourself up to a relationship with a counselor and you lean into it, I'm not saying it can't happen, but I would say it's really hard that it does happen.
Yeah.
Is that fair to, I mean,
for sure. I think that's half of the equation. You've also given other men permission.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
That's crucial.
Yeah.
Because, I only see you right now, once a month.
Yeah.
But you've given other men permission to check you.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Talk about the importance of that.
Oh goodness, yeah. Well, I mean, it's with anything. You need to have different people in your life that see you, for one, in different spheres, right? If you just have people in one part of your life, but then nobody knows anything else, so you've got to have people that are in different spheres of life. I mean, specifically, you're not part of our church,
right?
That's a great thing for me because you don't see anything within there.
Absolutely.
But then I have people within the context of my church that are seeing me day in and day out there, as well as just close friends that are the story of Moses, Aaron, and Hur, right? Just within that, I'm like, man, those are the guys that have that proximity to me.
Yes.
That know me, that see me, that are more than willing to call things out, that pray for each other, and they see me a ton in all kinds of environments. My wife is brilliant at that and is a huge piece. So I think we do that in every other area of our life. We have a coach for this, and we have a doctor for this, and we have I go to a physical therapist for my back, and we go to chiropractors for this. So we do this in all the other areas of our life. And for some reason, I don't know if it's pride, ego, stigma, maybe we all have our own selfish reasons on it. I know what mine are but I've got to have all these other pieces because they're going to see things and they have a different perspective.
Yeah.
And they're going to lean in different areas, and God is going to use them and speak to them in different ways. Like, oh, I needed to hear that from them. Oh, I needed to hear that from you. Oh, I didn't want to hear that, but I needed to hear that from them. So you've just got to surround yourself with, that's nothing new. That's been talked about, preached about for a long time. You just have to have the right people around you.
For sure. So you talked a little bit earlier about how this has helped you in your family.
Yep.
To have better conversations there. Talk about how it's helped you as a pastor.
Oh, goodness. How much more time do we have left?
Whatever you want.
No, I would say, oh man, where to start on that one? Leading a staff for sure, right? So I don't know if I used this word earlier, but trying to, within that self-awareness, it's like, I've even asked you, like, what are some of these other blind spots? Whether, again, it's personality, leadership style, how am I coming across to other people?
Oh, yeah.
Just because you lead a staff, whether it's a staff of 1 or 100, those are people with their own personalities and their own temperaments and their own backgrounds and their own preferences. So as a leader of a staff and then a leader of volunteers and a pastor of people, man, how do you continue to be authentic and healthy?
Yep.
Not just authentic, but authentic and healthy.
Yep.
But it's also, I've learned a ton from you, Jason. As a listener, not a strong suit of mine at all, if we haven't picked up on that yet or not. But I've even asked you, like, okay, how are you trained in these questions? Like, how do you ask such good questions? And that's helped me translate and transfer that within a staff and a leadership context of, I need to listen more.
Yeah.
I need to ask some more questions, not just be here to help, but to truly listen. Not that by any means I'm their counselor,
right?
But it's this conversation needs me to listen.
Oh, there's things that it would benefit every human being to get trained in counseling because it just makes you a better everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Better listener.
Even though we're not their counselors, it still makes us better in relationships.
Yeah, because of that posture where you start with empathy, and there's obviously grace, but then there's good questions and follow-up questions.
Bro, the hardest place for me to learn this was with my kids.
Yeah.
And I just now, like probably since 2000, I didn't get here with my kids till 2019. I remember.
Yeah.
So up till 2019, I could be such a great listener to you and ask the right questions. But with my kids,
forget it.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm probably not listening because all I'm doing is through a filter of fear, thinking about the problem and let me give you a solution and then check.
Yep.
Oh, it was awful. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this stuff I'm doing at the office, it works over
here.
here.
That's exactly right. Yep. So that alone of being the recipient of it and sitting on that side of the seat allowed me as a leader and a pastor of a staff to also use some of those best practices and those principles just within active listening and knowing that that's an area to grow in. And also giving, again, going to that authenticity piece of it of, hey, where's your silence at?
Sure.
I mean, this is what I'm currently learning. This is how God is growing me. I mean, my goodness, what God does in our own hearts and what he's doing in our own lives, that is going to spill out in other areas.
For sure.
And even the Exodus 34 with Moses glowing, I mean, I think when we had that conversation and that just wrecked me, I'm like, that's working it in some way within the next week plus. Because I'm like, that's what God was doing in me, and I want to be able to share that. And again, I know there's healthy and unhealthy levels of transparency and all those, but no, when he speaks, I want to be able to share what he's saying and what he's doing.
Yeah.
And so even from a congregational perspective as a pastor, man, this is what God is teaching me. I want to teach you pieces of this, and here's what I'm studying. I want to share this with you. Here's how I'm growing and I'm learning. I mean, my goodness, health permeates. So the healthier we are, that is going to show health in other areas. And the same thing is true of unhealth. When we're unhealthy, that is going to bleed over. And so just learning more of God's presence. We've even started with more so internally. I don't know if we've said a lot externally or not. I guess we are now. But creating that space for our people. I mean, we can go into a Sunday and plan. And trust me, we are planned. We are prepared. We have prayed through it. But can we also come with a posture of, ultimately, we want to create space for people to hear from God and see God move. And I don't have a 10-step plan on how that works. We just want to be thinking about it.
Yeah. I don't think there is a 10-step plan to the Holy Spirit.
Not at all.
One thing I love about you, because I've counseled in the last 20-something years, I've counseled a lot of pastors. And here's one thing pastors struggle with a lot. God will be doing something in their life. They'll take 10% of it for themselves and give 90% away.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's just what we do.
Sure.
So we got to be careful with that. Let me take what I'm getting and give it away too quick.
Yep.
What I've loved about you is you've made it a part of your fabric. That way you don't really give it away. You're actually just letting it come out.
Yeah, that's
because there's a difference.
That's a good point.
There's a difference in giving it away and then just letting it come out.
Yeah.
And not losing it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I'm still learning this. I struggle with the words on labeling it and trying to describe it, or I wouldn't even know where to start on teaching it, right? Yeah. And so I don't know how to do that, but, and even, I would say this, even on how things come out. So most people within a church context see me on Sundays, but the work and the prep and the prayers that are throughout the week, oh my goodness, like this presence piece, the 3 minutes before I start writing a message. I mean, that alone, that's a big piece of it as well. So yeah, I don't know if I appreciate the compliment. I don't know if I've done it well or not.
You have. I've been keeping tabs.
Keep an eye on me.
I've been keeping an eye on it.
So, but I mean, maybe it's the difference of when it's part of, use the word fabric, when it's part of your fabric, when it's just part of your life. Sure, the appropriate parts of that are going to come out in the right context, instead of trying to force something.
Yeah.
And it allows, honestly, for me at least, there's a big difference between what's for the platform and what's for like a table.
Yep.
And honestly, I mean, sure, some of it maybe comes out on a platform message, but most of it is in one-on-one, disciple-to-disciple conversations. It's disciple-making conversations. It has changed that dynamic for me. I would say it comes out more there than it does on a platform.
Yeah. Let's kind of wrap up with this one, because one thing I've always loved about your heart is how much you are a part of the community.
Yeah.
And a lot of pastors are part of their community.
Sure.
But sometimes you kind of wonder, is there an agenda to you being a part of the community?
Oh, I got
right?
you. Yep.
And with you can tell it's just so authentic. Like, you're not a part of the community to try to grow local Dawson.
Sure.
You were just a part of the community because that's what you're called to do.
Yeah.
And bro, you were glowing.
Oh, well, thanks, man.
You're welcome. But yeah, talk about that just for a minute of like, first of all, how did you get there? How did you get in that mindset of, no, I really want to be a part of this community?
Man, I don't know if I have that's where that mindset came from.
Okay.
I mean, truly, I think it's just, if you're going to be in something, be in it. And the intent is not to have something within church and community that are so separate. Most certainly we are a church entity, but we're in the community. And again, you're right. Every pastor, every church probably has language around that. But for me also, again, blame it on the personality. I love being in circles that I normally wouldn't be in. So as a Rotarian, I'm on the within the Chamber of Commerce. Like those are circles of people I normally wouldn't be in. And yeah, we cannot just go in with a. And I would say there probably is an agenda, right? But it's not a short-term agenda.
Sure. Yeah.
So we're in this for the long haul.
Yeah.
And man, Jason, to be able to be in those environments, and I mean, you know this as a counselor, right? As people experience tragedy, crisis, uncertainty, loss, well, who are the people that have been consistent in their life, and how could the Holy Spirit use you because you've been consistent in those moments? So my posture and my prayer has been, God, let me just be consistent where you want me, where you have me. Let me be present. Let me be consistent. And if there's an opportunity, if there's a moment, if there's whatever you deem, man, if you want to use me in that moment because of the consistency, let me be a trusted person in that person's life. And that goes well beyond attendance. I mean, that's church outside the walls of the church.
Outside
I would
the
hope.
walls, yeah.
So, I mean, is there an agenda? Sure. I want God to use me in the places that he has me. And I think I can hinder in that way, or I can help in that way.
But when I say agenda, I'm talking about you're not doing this for the sole purpose of I'm going to try to grow my church.
Oh, I understand. No,
that's the agenda I was referring to.
Gotcha. No, that agenda is not there. It's as a Christian, what's the agenda? It's he grows the church. Let him grow the church. Our agenda is to be disciples that make disciples.
Yeah.
And so for all of us, not just as a pastor, I mean, I tell our church this. No, where are you?
Yeah.
Let God use you there.
Yeah.
Be consistent where you are. Be intentional with where you are. And whatever school that is, whatever workplace it is, whatever civic organization that is, what little league you're part of, let God use you where you are. Be a disciple that makes disciples, and start right there.
You have no idea how many people that you and your church have made smile because you go into an elementary school and bring the teachers Chick-fil-A biscuits.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, y'all are known for that, right?
Yep.
You come in with the Chick-fil-A biscuits and you make a teacher's day who has to deal with difficult kids and difficult parents. For sure. And you're just coming in and saying, thank you. Thank you for taking care of the kids, right?
Yep.
So cool.
It goes back to the glow piece, hopefully.
Yes.
Right? Not for any, as a Christ follower, as a disciple of Jesus, and you even mentioned Peter and John, man, I would want our community to look and say, you know Jesus. Forget what church you go to, right? It's not like, oh, you must go to this church or that church. They look at you and say, I don't know what church you go to, but I bet you know Jesus.
Yeah.
Like that's, I would hope that would just be, man, not just my heart with my family, but with our church specifically, but for believers in general. May we, because of our presence with him, may that be what is noticeable.
Wow.
And for me at least, God has used you and counseling and those catch you off guard conversations that we've had to pull me closer into his presence, to make that veil even thinner, and let him take care of the rest. Let him take care of the opportunities. Let him, and man, it's easier to say that just in this context. I'm wrestling with it. I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm still battling my flesh in a lot of those.
Yeah, me too.
But that's why these conversations continue to be so. I think I tell you that every time. It's like, man, it's valuable, because without those conversations, I know where my default is, and to be able to have conversations that keep allowing God to pull me in, and for me to be receptive of him pulling me in to more of his presence and not just focused on the productivity.
Brian, this has been a joy.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you for what you do, for your ministry. Goodness. I said it earlier, counseling is a sign of strength, not weakness. And I think that environment is so useful, so helpful, and so needed. For every pastor, because man, nobody knows that weight except as a pastor, and that's not playing a victim card. We all carry different weights and burdens based on vocation. But for some reason, as pastors, I think there's that stigma of, oh man, if I'm in counseling, then I don't have it all together. I don't have it all together, and I need the grace of God. I need the Spirit leading me. I need my Savior has given me salvation, and I need some great people around me, and it's cool to see what God does through all those people.
This has been great. Thanks, you
man.
so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.